In the show today, we'll hear from Daren Hanson, Vice President of Sales at TeraGo, who will talk about disaster recovery and how a business can develop an effective disaster recovery plan. Hi there, welcome to WRLWND Radio. I'm your host, Marcelo Sugdeo. IT systems have become increasingly vital for the smooth operation of a company. And not just for companies, but for the economy as a whole. It is therefore very important to ensure that this smooth operation continues, and if there is a disaster, to have mechanisms in place for a rapid recovery. Stats indicate that companies that had major loss of business data, nearly half of them never reopen, and almost 1/3 close within 2 years. As a result, preparation for continuation or recovery of systems needs to be taken very seriously. Due to the seriousness of this topic, we've dedicated the entire show today to learn more about this. And to talk more about this is Daren Hanson from TeraGo. Hi Daren, welcome to WRLWND Radio.
Hi Marcelo, thanks for having me.
Daren, it's a known fact that disaster recovery has been around for decades. Today it is more critical than ever before to have a disaster recovery plan in place. What are some of the risks of not having a disaster recovery plan?
Yeah, so Marcelo, good question. So, having a disaster recovery plan is critical, so I just want to emphasize that point. And so not having one opens you up to a significant number of risks. So those risks include financial risks. So you literally could lose business. You could lose revenue if you can't transact business with your customers, engage with your suppliers. The financial risk could be so bad that you could go out of business. So we've seen that happen. In fact, we have a statistic that says 40% of businesses that actually suffer from a major disaster do go out of business. If you're able to mitigate your financial risks and those financial losses and impacts, then you're going to suffer from other impacts as well. So, for example, loss of customer confidence, damage to your brand and your brand equity. You're going to lose confidence within your employee base as well. You're potentially going to impact other projects that your employees are working on as they go scramble to recover the position with the IT systems that have gone down. And then for highly regulated industries, I'll close on this one, you actually could go out of compliance with critical regulatory requirements, right? So the risks and the impacts are quite significant.
All right, so we can see it's very, very critical that you do have a disaster recovery plan. Now, what are some of the control measures a business can put into place to reduce the risk of a disaster?
Well, the most critical thing is to have a good DR plan, a good disaster recovery plan, right? So that's really, that's kind of the silver bullet here. The challenge with disaster recovery plans, in particular in Canada, and we did a piece of primary research working with IDC. Most Canadian businesses that we have surveyed, the statistical sample that we took, actually most companies don't actually have a disaster recovery plan, and then those that don't feel like they have a very good one because they haven't been able to identify exactly what they need to be protecting themselves against. They lack the skill, so 36%, I'll use a statistic here, so 36% lack the skill to actually put that plan together. 45% don't think that they can identify what that disaster recovery plan needs to encompass and account for. And then the biggest thing we've learned for those companies that actually do have a disaster recovery plan, 90% of them actually aren't testing it. So they put a plan in place, but they're not testing it. So the odds of it actually not working as desired to recover effectively and on time and all that kind of stuff is completely at risk. So to answer your question, the biggest control you need to put in place is a robust disaster recovery plan.
So just jumping back to, you've mentioned testing it. So what is the recommended way to go about doing that?
Well, so the industry standard for testing, and there's two elements to this, Marcelo. So the first is you need to test regularly. So we think industry best practice is to test every quarter. Now, the other piece that backstops that is the criticality of actually managing and maintaining your disaster recovery plan. IT infrastructures today are fairly dynamic. You know, you bring new applications online, you implement new versions, and, you know, there's a lot of change within most IT environments. And so that's the other aspect, is your disaster recovery plan actually has to evolve with your changing IT landscape. So that's the other piece that's really critical.
Okay. Now, what would be considered an effective disaster recovery plan? I know you touched on testing and other measures that can be put into place, but what would be considered an effective one to have?
Yeah, so it's a good question as well, right? So I think you need to, if we start at the beginning of a process for developing a good disaster recovery plan, it begins with a comprehensive assessment of your infrastructure and what the critical applications and IT assets are that you have. And the criticality of those needs to be well defined, and it obviously needs to take into consideration the impact if those things go away. So if you're a retail store, for example, or a bank, you know, your ATM network is probably really important to you. So you need to identify what those key systems are, and those key systems are fundamentally a consequence of, you know, where the risk is. So that's the first thing. So you need to do a comprehensive assessment. Mm-hmm. Then you need to go through the process of figuring out for each of those systems, you know, what the consequences of the outages are, to define things like RPOs and RTOs. So recovery point objectives and recovery time objectives. So these are basically terms we use to define, you know, at what point in time do you need to recover to, and how long are you willing to take for your systems to get back up and running? Those essentially are what those two terms mean. So you need to define those kinds of things. Then you're going to need to implement the systems, you know, software or services from a company like TeraGo to basically, you know, implement those with and for you. And then you have to go down the next step, you know, to make sure that you've got a change management process in place to address the changes that I had talked about and the modifications that, you know, go on every day with your IT infrastructure. And then the system needs to be monitored and maintained on a regular basis, and then testing, right? Testing once a quarter. So those are the elements that we think go into a relatively robust disaster recovery plan.
As a business, where can I really start? What are the steps I need to take from my side to put an effective plan into place?
I think the first thing, Marcelo, is to look at what you may have in place already. So I think you need to do an audit or an inventory of what disaster recovery plans you may already have in place. Mm-hmm. You know, many companies have done something. Unfortunately, most companies have, you know, about half of the audience that we surveyed in our analysis actually don't have anything actually written down. But I think that's the first start is, you know, what do we actually have in place today? Because presumably some level of thought has gone into that. So I think you need to look at what you currently got. Then you need to cast a very critical eye to that plan. And I think part of the challenge that companies have, and one of the reasons, Marcelo, that they don't actually have comprehensive plans is because they don't have the skills, right? So I think as you look at this, you ought to be looking for a strategic partner who can come in and help you. Again, you know, I'll advertise TeraGo here. So that's one of the things we do. So I think you need to find a trusted advisor, potentially a managed service provider like us, who can actually not only consult with you through the assessment process, but actually do the implementation. And then again, because resources are constrained typically in IT shops in Canada these days, we think it's extremely effective and wise to actually outsource that to a managed service provider. So I think that's one of the first things you need to look at is who is going to be my strategic advisor to help me navigate this path to put the most robust plan in place that mitigates my risk while balances the cost of putting this in place. I think that's where you need to start.
All right. Well, thanks for pointing that out, Daren. Where can someone go to learn more about this?
There's a ton of resources available on the web. There's many vendors that are in this game, including us, obviously. Mm-hmm. But on the TeraGo website, you can navigate under our cloud services top menu item, and you'll see disaster recovery services as an element, and we'll give you a fairly comprehensive view of what our opinion is around how to approach this. Our IDC, commission study, white paper is up there, so there's a plethora of resources that we have on our website. I just say it's TeraGo.ca.
All right. Is there anything else you'd like to cover regarding this topic, Daren?
Yeah, I think it's a good chance just to recap, Marcel. So, IT is very dynamic. Businesses more and more across Canada are dependent upon IT. Unfortunately, we're underinvested because these businesses, IT is underinvested. The resources in the IT shop is underinvested because customers more and more need to focus more on their core business as opposed to becoming an awesome professional IT managing shop, right? So I think the first thing is companies should be looking more and more to managed service providers to leverage best practices and to maximize the effectiveness of their IT while minimizing costs. Disaster recovery specifically is super important. Not enough businesses in Canada are focused on it. Those that are have basically said we've done a not very good job of building a robust plan. And then those that do have a plan aren't testing it, right? So you got to put a disaster recovery plan in place. You should be doing that with a trusted advisor. You need to be comprehensive in your risk assessment to figure out what you really need to back up and put into your disaster recovery continuity plan. You need to test it and maintain it and put a change management discipline in place. So those, I would just emphasize that, those are the key points that people need to take away.
Well, thank you so much, Daren, for joining us in the show today to talk about disaster recovery.
My pleasure, Marcella. I thank you for the opportunity.
That was Daren Hanson, Vice President of Sales and Business Development at TeraGo, talking about having an effective disaster recovery plan. As we've heard today, having a disaster recovery plan is super important in running a business. It starts with working with a trusted advisor, then to do a comprehensive assessment, and then of course to test and to maintain that and to do that regularly. That's all that we have for the show today. Thanks for joining us here on WRLWND Radio. This is Marcel Sugdeo saying stay safe in the technology whirlwind.